Hey guys, tonight, we are going to travel way, way back in time. We're headed to a place of unimaginable wealth and power, a realm so vast, it feels like something out of a fantasy novel, though I promise you, it was very real. Picture yourself stepping through a shimmering portal, leaving behind the glow of your phone, or the hum of your fan, and finding your feet on sun-baked earth, under an impossibly blue sky, somewhere in what we now call the Middle East. You're surrounded by the scent of spices, dry dust, and something suave from a nearby garden. You hear the murmur of 1,000 voices speaking languages you don't understand, the distant clang of hammers and the lowing of cattle. This is Persia, the heart of the Achaemenid Empire, around 2,500 years ago. It's a place of grandeur, intrigue, and survival, and honestly, you probably won't last 5 minutes here without a guide, or at least a decent phrase book. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, drop your location and local time in the comments below. I always love seeing where you're all drifting off from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself here in this bustling, formidable empire, and your entry point is a name whispered with reverence, a name destined to echo through the annals of this era, Atossa. Her story begins not with a bang, but with the quiet, almost stifling formality of a royal birth. You aren't just anyone witnessing this. You are subtly positioned within the inner circle, perhaps a distant cousin, a trusted servant's child, someone small enough to observe without being noticed. It's the year 550 BCE or thereabouts. Pinning down exact dates this far back can be tricky, like trying to find a specific grain of sand on a beach the size of Asia Minor. Atossa is born into the very epicenter of power, into the lineage of Cyrus the Great himself. Imagine that pedigree. Her father is Cyrus, the man who founded this colossal empire, who conquered Babylon, and famously allowed the exiled Jews to return to Jerusalem. He's the kind of historical figure who gets epithets like the Great attached to his name permanently and for good reason. He built something truly immense from what was not long before a collection of smaller kingdoms and tribes. You feel the weight of his legacy in the very air you breathe within these palace walls. Being born the daughter of Cyrus means you arrive with a silver spoon in your mouth and a destiny already etched out by political necessity and tradition. You're not just a baby. You're a piece on a geopolitical chessboard. Your existence is tied to the stability and future of the Achaemenid dynasty. The palace you inhabit isn't a single building. It's more like a sprawling complex, a small city unto itself, nestled within the larger capital. Perhaps Pasargadae, at this early stage, a testament to Cyrus's vision. The air inside is cooler, filtered by thick mud-brick walls and shaded courtyards, a welcome relief from the glare outside. The sounds are different, too. The soft shuffling of sandaled feet, the murmur of women's voices from hidden quarters, the distant clang of blacksmiths working in the outer compounds, crafting everything from simple tools to elaborate gold jewelry. Mainstream historical fact alert. The Achaemenid Empire, founded by Cyrus the Great, was for a time the largest empire the world had yet seen, stretching from the Balkans in the west to the Indus Valley in the east. Try wrapping your head around that. An empire that spanned 3 continents. It was a melting pot of cultures, languages, and religions, all held together, sometimes precariously, by Persian administration and military might. Growing up in Cyrus's household, you are surrounded by the tangible symbols of this vast dominion. Tribute arrives constantly, gold from Lydia ivory, from India, exotic animals from Egypt, slaves from conquered territories. You might see processions of people in foreign garb, bearing gifts, their face a mixture of awe and apprehension. It's a constant visual reminder of the Empire's reach and your family's place at its apex. A quirky tidbit about Cyrus. He wasn't just a conqueror. He was also a shrewd administrator, and for his time remarkably tolerant of different customs and religions. The Cyrus cylinder, a clay artifact inscribed with a declaration in Babylonian cuneiform, is often cited as an early charter of human rights because it describes his policy of respecting local customs and allowing displaced people, like the Jews, to return home and rebuild their temples. Imagine in an age of brutal subjugation, a ruler saying, "Yeah, you guys can go back and worship your God." Sounds fine. It was a strategic move, no doubt fostering loyalty in conquered lands, but it stands in stark contrast to many rulers of the time. Your early world is defined by the women's quarters, the andron, or harem, though harem often conjures up later more salacious images than the reality of this ancient Persian court. It's less a place of idle pleasure and more the heart of domestic power, a secure, segregated space where royal women, their children, and their servants live. The hierarchy here is complex, a miniature court, reflecting the larger one outside. You are positioned high within it simply by virtue of your father's identity. Life isn't all gilded cages, though. You receive an education deemed suitable for a princess, while boys were trained in riding archery and telling the truth. The famous Persian education described by Herodotus, your lessons focus on administration of the household, perhaps accounting, managing vast stores of food, textiles, and tribute, is no small task, history, and the complex etiquette required to navigate royal life. You learn which silks are most valuable, how to oversee the preparation of elaborate banquets, and perhaps most importantly, how to remain silent and observant in the presence of powerful men. Historians still argue whether Persian royal women held significant, formal, political power, or if their influence was primarily exercised through informal channels through their husbands, sons, and the complex web of relationships within the court. Were they simply pawns in dynastic marriages, or did they subtly shape policy and patronage from behind the veil? It's a question that lingers like the scent of incense in these ancient halls, hard to pin down definitively from the limited sources available. As a child of Cyrus, you understand from a young age that your life is not entirely your own. You are a valuable commodity, a potential bride whose marriage will forge alliances and consolidate power. The weight of the Empire's future in some small way rests on your tiny shoulders. You are Atossa, daughter of the King of Kings, and your story, intertwined with the fate of Persia, is just beginning. Time, as it tends to do, doesn't stop even for empires built of gold and ambition. The sun rises and sets, the seasons turn, and the little princess, Atossa, daughter of Cyrus the Great, grows up within those secure labyrinthine walls. The years blur into a tapestry of courtly routine. Lessons, rituals, the quiet hum of the women's quarters, punctuated by the arrival of news from the far-flung corners of the empire. You, still observing from your discreet vantage point, watch as she sheds the vulnerability of childhood and steps into the complex reality of royal womanhood. Her father, the formidable Cyrus, eventually passes from the scene. The empire, for all its strength, holds its breath. The mantle of power falls upon his son, Cambyses II, Atossa's half-brother. This transition is never simply a smooth handover of keys. It's a moment of intense political fragility. Rivals emerge, loyalties are tested, and the sheer weight of ruling such a vast and diverse territory presses down on the new king. The atmosphere in the palace subtly shifts. The easy, almost paternal authority of Cyrus is replaced by the sharper, perhaps more unpredictable energy of a new ruler, keen to prove himself. The whispers in the corridors grow more guarded, the smiles more practiced. You feel the tension in the air, a low thrum beneath the surface of daily life. In this world, royal daughters aren't just cherished family members. They are living, breathing political assets. Their value is measured in the alliances they can forge, the dynastic claims they carry, and the stability they can lend to the ruling line. And Atossa, as the daughter of the founder of the empire, carries perhaps the most precious lineage of all. Her blood is the purest link back to Cyrus the Great. Any man who marries her immediately strengthens his claim, anchors himself to the very origins of the dynasty. And so, as she reaches marriageable age, the whispers around Atossa turn to strategic unions. This isn't about romantic notions or finding a partner based on shared interests, unless those interests involve dominating half the known world, I suppose. This is about power, plain and simple. It's about keeping the sacred bloodline concentrated within the ruling family, preventing potential rivals from gaining legitimacy by marrying into the lineage. The first major arrangement sees Atossa married to her half-brother, Cambyses II. Now hold up. I know what you're thinking. Marrying your brother, that's not usually how we do things. And you're right, from a modern perspective, or even from the perspective of many ancient cultures, this practice was considered strange, perhaps even taboo. The Greeks, who wrote some of the key historical accounts we have of Persia, certainly found it odd, and often cited it as an example of Persian barbarity or difference. But within the Achaemenid royal family, it seems to have become a practice, perhaps adopted or reinforced, to keep that precious Scythian bloodline within the immediate ruling core. Mainstream historical fact alert. While brother-sister marriage was not common practice among the general Persian populace, it appears to have been utilized by the Achaemenid royal family, starting possibly with Cambyses and Atossa, to consolidate dynastic power and prevent fragmentation of lineage claims. Herodotus, our main though sometimes biased source, describes Cambyses marrying his sisters Atossa and Meroe, stating that this practice was introduced by Cambyses and was contrary to Persian custom. So while weird to many, it was a strategic, if controversial, move for the Persian kings. Life as Cambyses' wife is different. The women's quarters, while still a sanctuary, now feel weighted with the pressures of his reign. He is known for his ambition. He sets his sights on Egypt, one of the oldest and most powerful kingdoms in the region. News arrives regularly of his campaign of battles, fought of the long, arduous march across the desert. You might see courtiers poring over maps, or what passed for maps back then, hear hushed discussions about supply lines, or witness the arrival of captured Egyptian treasures, strange, beautiful artifacts that speak of an ancient alien world now brought into the Persian orbit. A quirky tidbit: Cambyses II actually succeeded in conquering Egypt in 525 BCE, bringing the venerable civilization of the pharaohs under Persian rule. There are some truly wild stories about his time there, many likely embellished by Greek sources who weren't exactly big fans of the Persians. One famous tale, possibly untrue, claims he went mad in Egypt, committed sacrilegious acts against Egyptian gods, like attacking a sacred bull, the Apis bull, and even ordered the murder of his own brother, Bardia. Whether he actually went mad, or if this was propaganda, well, that leads us nicely to our scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Cambyses II truly ordered the secret execution of his brother Bardia before heading to Egypt, or if the story of Bardia's death was a later invention by Darius III to justify his own seizure of power. The official version, promoted by Darius himself in the Behistun inscription, claims that while Cambyses was away, a Median priest named Gaumata impersonated Bardia, who had supposedly been killed earlier, and seized the throne, rallying support by promising tax relief. Cambyses, on his way back from Egypt, supposedly died mysteriously, perhaps by accident or suicide, after hearing the news, leaving Darius to challenge the false Smerdis, as the Greeks called him, Smerdis, being the Greek version of Bardia. So imagine the confusion and uncertainty gripping the court. Whispers of a rebellion reach the palace. A man claiming to be Bardia, the king's brother, is on the throne. But wait, didn't the king already eliminate him? Or did he? No one seems entirely sure. Loyalties fracture. Some believe the claimant won over by his promises and may be tired of Cambyses' rule. Others, particularly those close to the core royal family, are suspicious. You within the women's quarters feel the tremor of this crisis. The air crackles with fear and uncertainty. Who is the real king? Who is the impostor? Amidst this chaos, Atossa's position becomes even more critical. She is undeniably Cyrus's daughter. She was Cambyses' wife, and according to some accounts, she may have been forced or strategically married to the man claiming to be Bardia as well. If the impostor wanted to legitimize his claim, marrying the true daughter of Cyrus would be a master stroke. It's like saying, see, even the direct lineage accepts me. Whether she married the real Bardia, if he was still alive and somehow involved, or the supposed impostor Gaumata, her body becomes a vessel for political legitimacy. Her personal feelings, her desires, are utterly secondary to the needs of the dynasty and the state. You see the quiet, almost resigned strength required to navigate these treacherous waters. One moment she is wife to the conquering hero, the next potentially married to a usurper, caught in the deadliest political drama imaginable. It's enough to make your head spin, frankly, navigating that family tree during a coup attempt. So that's Uncle. Wait, is that Uncle or the guy pretending to be Uncle? And is he married to Aunt Atossa now? The reign of this false Smerdis, as Darius tells it, is brief but impactful. He rules for less than a year, gaining some popular support before a conspiracy of Persian nobles led by Darius rises up against him. The story goes that the conspirators, including Darius, needed proof that the king was an impostor who had his ears cut off previously. They supposedly relied on one of the royal women, perhaps Atossa or her sister, to check for this physical mutilation while the king was asleep. Imagine that scene. The tension, the danger, a woman risking everything in the dead of night to confirm a physical detail that could bring down a king or get her killed. Regardless of the exact details, which are, as you can guess, heavily debated and shrouded in the propaganda of the victor Darius. This period is one of immense turmoil. The empire so painstakingly built by Cyrus teeters on the brink of civil war. The succession is violently contested, and traditional norms like the sanctity of the royal family are being twisted and challenged by the impostor. Atossa survives this period of upheaval. Her lineage, while putting her in danger, also makes her invaluable. She is a prize, a symbol of the true dynasty. As the dust begins to settle, and Darius emerges victorious from the struggle against the false Bardia and against other rivals who popped up during the instability, the focus shifts once more to securing his claim. And who better to marry than the woman whose blood connects her directly to the founder? So Atossa's youth culminates not in carefree days, but in a series of politically necessary marriages navigating the dangerous currents of dynastic succession. She moves from being a princess in waiting to a queen potentially married to her half-brother, possibly to an impostor, and her survival through this tumultuous period speaks volumes about her resilience and the crucial significance of her position within the Achaemenid world. Her life is inextricably bound to the shifting sands of power, and her journey is far from over. She is now positioned to become a central figure in the reign of the man who will consolidate the empire, a new Darius the Great. The dust begins to settle heavy and pervasive, coating everything in the palace in a fine, gritty layer that seems to symbolize the recent upheaval. The air, so recently thick with fear and uncertainty, now vibrates with a different kind of energy. The restless ambition of a new king consolidating his power. Darius is on the throne. Not the direct heir, not the son of Cyrus or the brother of Cambyses, but a cousin from a collateral line, a man who seized power through conspiracy and strength. He is capable, driven, and acutely aware that his claim, while secured by victory, isn't as inherently sacred as that of the founder's lineage. And this is where you see Atossa's destiny once again become inextricably linked to the needs of the empire. Her survival through the chaos of Cambyses' demise and the false Bardia's brief reign wasn't just luck. It was a testament to her immense value. She is the living embodiment of the pure, unadulterated bloodline of Cyrus the Great. Her father founded this vast world you're drifting through. Her blood is the foundation stone. Any man who marries her gains an immediate, undeniable connection to that origin story, bolstering his own legitimacy in a way that no amount of conquest or administrative skill alone can provide. So the politically necessary marriages continue. After surviving the tumultuous period, Atossa is married to Darius. This union isn't just a convenience. It's a cornerstone of Darius's new reign. It's like getting the royal seal of approval from history itself. By taking Atossa as his principal wife, Darius isn't just marrying a woman. He's marrying the dynasty. He's wrapping himself in the mantle of Cyrus, signaling to the entire empire, from the satrap in distant Egypt to the soldier on the eastern frontier, that he is the rightful successor linked directly to the revered founder through his daughter. You can almost hear the collective sigh of relief, or perhaps calculated recalculation across the vast territories as this marriage solidifies the new order. Life under Darius shifts again. If Cyrus's court felt grand and paternal, and Cambyses's felt ambitious and perhaps a little volatile, Darius's court is about structure, organization, and monumental scale. Darius is the great administrator, the builder, the man who takes the sprawling conquests of his predecessors and turns them into a coherent, governable empire. You feel the change in the very rhythm of the palace. There's a sense of purpose, of grand projects underway. Messengers arrive not just with news of battles, but with reports on tax revenues, engineering challenges, and the progress of massive construction sites. Atossa, as the chief queen, holds a position of immense prestige within the complex social structure of the Persian court. The royal women lived in the Andarun, often translated inadequately as the harem. Forget the caricatures you might have seen. The Andarun was a significant part of the royal establishment, with its own hierarchy. Administrators, often eunuchs, who we'll get to, don't worry, and considerable wealth and resources. Royal women weren't necessarily confined idly. They managed vast estates, oversaw workshops, and wielded influence through their relationships and status. Atossa, as the daughter of Cyrus and wife of Darius, would have been at the very pinnacle of this world. You might see processions of servants carrying luxurious goods into the women's quarters, silks from the east, precious stones from distant mines, spices, perfumes. The sounds would be different, too. The clatter of looms, the murmur of many voices speaking different languages. The empire is vast and diverse. Remember the distant sound of hammers striking stone as Darius's great building projects begin to rise. Mainstream historical fact alert: Darius the Worst is renowned for his administrative genius. He organized the sprawling Achaemenid Empire into roughly 20 provinces called satrapies, each governed by a satrap governor, but with built-in checks and balances, like a military commander and a royal secretary reporting directly to the king. He standardized coinage. The Daric was the gold coin, implemented tax systems, and commissioned the Royal Road, a massive infrastructure project that allowed for rapid communication and troop movement across thousands of miles. This organizational framework was crucial to holding the massive empire together and laid the foundation for its continued success. It wasn't just about conquering. It was about making the conquest work, logistically and economically. Imagine the paperwork. Even in the ancient world, bureaucracy finds a way. Atossa's influence within this well-oiled machine is harder to pin down with absolute certainty, but ancient sources suggest it was significant. Herodotus, the Greek historian, who is one of our main, albeit sometimes biased, sources for this period, gives us a fascinating glimpse into Atossa's potential sway over Darius. He recounts a story where Atossa suffers from a tumor on her breast, perhaps early breast cancer. She is initially too ashamed to show it to anyone. When it worsens, a Greek physician named Democedes, captured by the Persians, is brought to her in secret. He treats her successfully, a quirky tidbit. In exchange for curing her, Democedes asks Atossa to persuade Darius to let him return to Greece. But Atossa, according to Herodotus, has her own agenda. She tells Democedes that she will help him, but first he must get Darius to campaign against Greece. Why? Because she wants Laconian, Spartan, and Argive slave women, the most beautiful women in Greece, supposedly. So she goes to Darius, and night after night urges him to launch an expedition against Greece, arguing that it would add glory to his reign and keep his armies occupied. She specifically tells him to attack Greece before undertaking other campaigns. Herodotus presents this as a key factor in Darius's decision to eventually invade Greece, starting the Persian Wars. Now, how much of that story is true? Historians still argue whether Herodotus's account of Atossa's influence on Darius, particularly regarding the decision to invade Greece, is accurate, or if it reflects Greek perceptions or perhaps misperceptions of how decisions were made in the Persian court, or even if it's a literary device to explain the origins of the conflict. Was Atossa truly driven by a desire for specific slave women? Did she really hold that much sway over a powerful king like Darius? Or was this story a convenient narrative for the Greeks, perhaps allowing them to attribute the cause of the conflict to the whims of a foreign queen, rather than purely geopolitical factors? It's a classic challenge when dealing with ancient history, filtering fact from anecdote, understanding bias, and accepting that some motivations and conversations are lost to time. What we do know is that Darius did eventually campaign against Greece, suffering a famous defeat at Marathon in 490 BCE. And we know that Atossa was a woman of immense status and likely considerable intelligence, having navigated the perilous politics of the court for decades. While her direct influence on policy might be debated, her presence, her lineage, and her position were undeniable factors in the Achaemenid world. You see her navigating this complex world. The political discussions that reached the women's quarters, the reports from across the empire, the constant flow of people and information. While Darius is building his magnificent new capital still at Persepolis, carving his triumphs into mountainsides and extending his roads, Atossa is managing her own sphere of influence, raising the children who will potentially inherit this vast realm. Her sons with Darius are particularly important. Remember, Darius had other wives and sons from before he became king, but a son born to Atossa after. He took the throne. A son whose mother was the daughter of Cyrus would have the strongest claim possible, and Atossa provides him with not just one, but multiple sons, solidifying her position and ensuring her lineage continues to play a central role. The most famous of these sons, the one who will follow Darius onto the throne, is Xerxes. His birth cements Atossa's status as the queen mother of the future king. You see the quiet power dynamic at play. While Darius is the public face of the empire, commanding armies and issuing decrees, Atossa's influence might have been softer, more subtle, woven into the fabric of court life, familial relationships, and trusted counsel. Perhaps the story about the Greek physician and the slave women, even if embellished, contains a kernel of truth about her ability to get the king's ear and gently steer his thinking, framing her desires in terms of the empire's glory. It's not hard to imagine a queen finding clever ways to achieve her goals within the constraints of her time and place. Her life now enters a phase of established power. The upheaval of succession is past. Darius's reign is long and prosperous, marked by incredible achievements in governance, architecture, and infrastructure. Atossa is at the heart of this golden age of the Achaemenid Empire, presiding over the royal household, raising the next generation of rulers, and watching the world's greatest empire expand and organize itself on an unprecedented scale. She has survived political turmoil, navigated tricky family dynamics, even by royal standards, and emerged as a key figure in the court of the King of Kings. Her story isn't just about survival. It's about flourishing within a system that often treated women as commodities, finding ways to exert influence and secure her position through the power of her lineage and her intelligence. The grand palaces Darius builds, like Susa and Persepolis, become her home, testaments to the wealth and power she now shares, albeit from her position within the Endarun. You can almost hear the distant chisels working on the great stone reliefs at Persepolis, depicting the king and his court, the very world she inhabits. You are now firmly situated in the glorious, well-ordered reign of Darius the Great, living within the walls of palaces that are growing more magnificent by the year. Susa Ecbatana, and the breathtaking new capital rising from the desert floor, Persepolis, city of the Persians. The air here is different. It carries the scent of expensive imported woods, polishing oils, and the dry mineral tang of cut stone. The soundscape is filled with the measured activity of a vast administration at work, punctuated by the calls of guards, the rustle of scribes' papyri or clay tablets more likely, and the distant rhythmic chipping of sculptors working on the terraces of Persepolis. Atossa's world is centered within the Endarun, but its influence radiates outward. She is not just a resident. She is the cornerstone of the dynasty. Her position as daughter of Cyrus the Great gives her unparalleled status, a living link to the empire's revered founder. And now she has provided Darius with sons, crucially sons born after. He became King of Kings. This distinction is vital in a system where succession isn't always as simple as oldest son gets everything. While Darius has older sons from wives he married before ascending the throne, the sons born to Atossa are special. They carry the bloodline of Cyrus and are born to the reigning king in his established legitimacy. This provides their claim with a unique potency. Of these sons, Xerxes begins to emerge as the favored, the one whose destiny is increasingly linked with the peacock throne. You see the quiet competition unfold. It's not necessarily overt backstabbing, though. Palace politics are never without tension. It's more about positioning, about allies, about demonstrating competence and favor. The various princes have their own households, their own tutors, their own developing networks of support. But Xerxes has Atossa. Imagine the conversations within the Endarun. While the Greek story about the breast tumor and the desire for slave women might be embellished, it speaks to a reality Atossa had Darius's ear. She wasn't just a royal consort. She was a trusted confidant, a partner in the grand project of ruling the empire. She had lived through the chaos of Cambyses' death and the brief dangerous reign of Bardia. She understood the fragility of power and the importance of legitimacy better than almost anyone. Her quiet advocacy for Xerxes would have been relentless and strategic. She wouldn't have needed to shout or demand. Her mere presence, her status, her wisdom gleaned from years at the heart of the court would have given weight to her opinions. She could frame Xerxes' qualities subtly, highlight his strengths, and perhaps gently steer conversations about the future. The process of selecting an heir wasn't a single dramatic moment. It was a gradual recognition influenced by the king's favor, the support of key nobles, and the perceived strength of the prince's claim. While Darius had several sons who could technically vie for the throne, Xerxes held a unique advantage. Mainstream historical fact alert, Xerxes III was indeed chosen by Darius I to be his successor, despite having older half-brothers. Herodotus tells us that Darius's oldest son, Artobazan, born to his first wife before he became king, contested Xerxes' claim. However, Darius ultimately chose Xerxes, reportedly influenced by the argument that Xerxes was the son of Atossa, daughter of Cyrus, and born after. Darius became king. This decision highlights the immense importance placed on Atossa's lineage in legitimizing the next ruler. It wasn't just about seniority. It was about connecting the new line directly back to the founder through the most potent living link. You can almost feel the shifting currents in the palace as Xerxes grows from a favored prince into the clear heir apparent. His household staff expands, his tutors are likely among the most learned men in the empire, and his public appearances become more significant. He is being molded into the next king of kings, observing his father, learning the immense responsibilities of ruling such a vast and diverse realm. Atossa's status evolves accordingly. She transitions from chief wife to the venerable queen mother. This title carries enormous weight. She is the mother of the future king, a figure of respect and authority, potentially influencing not just succession, but appointments, court politics, and even policy through her son once he takes the throne. Her life is a masterclass in navigating power dynamics within constraints. Her presence at court ensures a continuity of the Achaemenid legacy. She is a living link to the golden age under Cyrus, a reminder of the empire's origins and its core identity. Nobles and officials seeking favor with the future king would certainly pay their respects to the Queen Mother, understanding her influence, whether overt or subtle. A quirky tidbit: Persian royal princes received rigorous training, not just in administration and warfare, but also in virtues like truth-telling and riding. They were often educated together in a special royal school, fostering camaraderie and potentially rivalry among them. They learned to hunt, to endure hardship, and to govern provinces to gain practical experience. This period of training for Xerxes would have been overseen at least in part by Atossa, ensuring he was instilled with the values she deemed important for a ruler descended from Cyrus. Imagine the sheer discipline required. No hitting the snooze button when you have empire building on your curriculum. Life continues in the grand palaces. Darius is busy with his monumental projects. The construction of Persepolis proceeds, becoming a dazzling symbol of Achaemenid power and wealth, a place for receiving tribute from across the empire and celebrating Nowruz, the Persian New Year. You see the carved reliefs taking shape, depicting processions of delegates from every corner of the empire, bringing gifts to the king. This is the world Xerxes is preparing to inherit, a world meticulously ordered and richly endowed by his father. And Atossa is at the heart of it all, though likely behind the scenes of the grand public ceremonies at Persepolis. Her influence is felt in the selection of tutors for the young princes, the management of the royal household, and perhaps in the private counsel she offers to Darius and later Xerxes. Historians still argue whether Atossa's intervention was the decisive factor in Xerxes' selection as heir, or if Darius simply recognized that Xerxes had the strongest, most legitimate claim based on his birthright, son of Atossa, daughter of Cyrus, and his birth during Darius's kingship. Was it political calculation, a nod to tradition and legitimacy, or the result of a queen's persistent influence? The sources hint at influence, but the precise weight of her words versus the political realities of the time remains open to interpretation. Regardless of the exact mechanism, Xerxes is named crown prince. This is a significant moment for Atossa. Her future, her security, and the continuation of the lineage she represents are now tied to her son's success. She has navigated the treacherous waters of court succession and emerged with her position solidified at the highest level. As Darius's reign draws to a close, Xerxes takes on more responsibility. He might be appointed governor of a key province like Babylon to gain experience. He participates in court ceremonies and military reviews. You see him stepping into his future role, perhaps a little stiffly at first, then with growing confidence. Atossa would be watching, advising, ensuring he is prepared for the immense task ahead. The last years of Darius's reign are marked by continued administrative work, building and dealing with revolts, like one in Egypt, and the lingering tensions with Greece after the defeat at Marathon. Darius is planning another grand expedition against Greece when he dies in 486 BCE. Xerxes ascends the throne smoothly. His succession is undisputed, a testament to Darius's careful planning and, no doubt, Atossa's groundwork. At 36 years old, Xerxes is a mature man ready to inherit the largest empire the world had ever seen. With Xerxes as king of kings, Atossa reaches the zenith of her formal status. Queen Mother. In the complex hierarchy of the Achaemenid court, the Queen Mother often held immense respect and sometimes significant political power. She would preside over the royal women, manage vast resources, and continue to offer counsel to the king. Her life story up to this point is one of extraordinary resilience and political savvy. Born into royalty, surviving multiple regime changes, marrying 2 kings, 3, if you count the false, Bardia, and successfully positioning her son as the heir to the empire. She is not just a passive figure in history. She is an active player, a woman who used her lineage, her intelligence, and her proximity to power to shape events, even if those actions are often glimpsed only through the filtered lens of ancient historians. You see her older now, perhaps sitting in the gardens of Persepolis, overseeing her household, receiving visitors, a figure of quiet authority. She has seen empires rise and fall, sons become kings, and the world transform around her. The sounds of the palace are familiar now. The distant trumpets, signaling the king's movements, the murmur of courtiers, the rhythmic splash of water in the palace gardens. This is her world, a world she has helped to build, and sustain a world where her blood flows in the veins of the King of Kings. The transition is smoother than you might have expected. Darius, the King of Kings, who had reigned for 36 years, passes away, and his designated heir, Xerxes, steps onto the peacock throne. There is no major upheaval, no civil war tearing the empire apart like the one that brought Darius to power. The vast Achaemenid machine continues to hum, perhaps with a slightly different rhythm, a new hand at the controls, but fundamentally stable. You are now navigating the court of Xerxes Vatatar. It feels familiar, yet subtly different. The palaces at Susa Ecbatana, and especially Persepolis, are still the heart of this world, but the energy shifts. While Darius was the great builder, the administrator, the consolidator, Xerxes, at least initially inherits a realm largely put in order. His early reign focuses on securing his position and addressing the lingering challenges from his father's time. One of the first things Xerxes does is deal with the revolts that flared up during Darius's last years, particularly in Egypt and Babylon. Mainstream historical fact: Xerxes suppressed these rebellions, firmly reasserting Persian authority. He even took measures in Babylon that some ancient sources describe as harsh, perhaps reflecting a desire to prevent future defiance from that historically proud city. This shows a king determined to maintain control and project strength from the outset. He wasn't going to let the edges of the empire fray on his watch. Atossa's position during this time is one of immense, though perhaps less overt, power. She is now the Queen Mother, a title that commands reverence and respect throughout the empire. Her household is vast, her resources immense. While Xerxes is the ultimate authority, Atossa remains a figure of quiet influence, particularly within the Endarun, and in matters concerning the royal family. She is the matriarch, the living link to Cyrus the Great, and the mother of the current King of Kings. Her counsel would still be sought, her opinions still carry weight, perhaps more so in private chambers than in public pronouncements. Think of the sheer scale of maintaining this royal household. A quirky tidbit: running a Persian royal palace was an operation of staggering complexity, involving thousands of servants, guards, administrators, cooks, concubines, and specialized eunuchs for every conceivable task, from managing the king's wardrobe to overseeing the royal gardens. The logistics of feeding, housing, and directing this miniature city within a city were immense. Atossa, as Queen Mother, would have presided over a significant portion of this, particularly the women's quarters and their associated staff, giving her control over a vast network of people and resources. Imagine the planning meetings just to ensure everyone got fed and dressed on time. It makes coordinating a large family gathering look like a walk in the park. Life within the palace settles into a grand, predictable rhythm. Days are filled with administrative tasks, receiving reports from across the empire, overseeing building projects. Persepolis is still being finished, becoming ever more magnificent, and managing the intricate web of courtly life. The air might carry the scent of roasting meats from the royal kitchens, the murmur of countless conversations in various languages echoing through the vast halls, and the distant sound of chisels still working on the stone reliefs that tell the story of the Achaemenid Empire in pictures. Xerxes is described by historians in various ways, sometimes as impulsive, sometimes as capable, often in stark contrast to his father Darius or grandfather Cyrus, particularly by Greek writers who viewed him through the lens of the Persian Wars. But in these early years, the court seems stable, opulent, and focused inward on solidifying power and completing the grand projects initiated by Darius. The stability of this period provides a backdrop for the personal lives unfolding within the palace walls. While the grand affairs of state occupy Xerxes, the daily life within the Andarun continues governed by Atossa and the hierarchy of royal women. This is where relationships, form alliances are made, and the personal dramas of the royal family play out largely hidden from the public eye. Historians still argue whether Xerxes' early reign was primarily a continuation of Darius's policies, or if he immediately began to implement his own distinct vision for the empire. Some see his initial actions, like suppressing the revolts and focusing on Persepolis, as solidifying his inherited power base, while others interpret them as early signs of the grand ambitions that would later manifest in his massive military campaign against Greece. Was he patiently preparing, or just tying up loose ends before embarking on his own path? From your perspective within the palace, you feel the pervasive sense of order and wealth. Tribute arrives regularly from satrapies, stretching from India to Nubia, filling the treasuries with gold, silver, precious stones, maidens, and exotic goods. Messengers arrive constantly via the royal road, the incredibly efficient communication network spanning the empire, bringing news and directives. You see the sheer scale of the empire reflected in the constant flow of people and resources through the palace gates. It's a world built on power hierarchy and immense wealth, managed with impressive, if sometimes brutal, efficiency. Atossa, the Queen Mother, is at the apex of the royal women's world. Her suite of rooms would be among the most lavish, her staff the most numerous and devoted. She is beyond the day-to-day struggles of younger wives vying for favor or the king's attention. Her status is fixed, her lineage undeniable, her influence cemented by her son's rule. She has navigated the treacherous waters of succession and secured her position at the very heart of the empire's power structure. You might see her overseeing ceremonies within the Andarun, giving directives to her staff, or perhaps in quiet consultation with Xerxes. She is a figure of quiet, formidable authority. Life in the Persian court could also be rather, shall we say, leisurely, when affairs of state weren't pressing. Jokes aside, the amount of leisure time available to the highest levels of society was considerable. Banquets were legendary for their scale and extravagance, featuring foods from across the empire, elaborate entertainment, and rivers of wine. The royal gardens were oases of calm and beauty, meticulously planned and maintained. Hunting was a favorite pastime for the king and nobles, often in vast royal parks stocked with game. This wasn't just about survival. It was a display of power and mastery over nature, a training ground for warfare, and a chance to escape the formality of court. You could easily spend days simply enjoying the curated perfection of the palace environment, forgetting the immense complex world outside its walls. This stable, opulent setting under Xerxes, with Atossa as the respected matriarch, provides the stage upon which the personal relationships and courtly dynamics that will become central to our story begin to unfold. It's in this world of vast wealth, strict hierarchy, and veiled influence that the connections that will lead to one of the more unusual stories from ancient Persia will form. The empire is at peace internally, building its grand monuments and consolidating its power, but the seeds of future events are being sown within the private quarters of the royal family. The story is not just about kings and battles. but about the lives, relationships, and often hidden struggles of the people who lived within this magnificent complex system. And Atossa, ever watchful, ever influential, is at the center of it all. Amidst the grandeur and ordered opulence of Xerxes's court, you notice the constant presence of a particular group of people. They are everywhere, it seems, moving through the vast halls, tending to the royal family's needs, managing the intricate logistics of palace life. These are the eunuchs, a ubiquitous feature of ancient Near Eastern and Mediterranean courts, and absolutely central to the functioning of the Achaemenid system. Their presence is so woven into the fabric of daily life that you might almost cease to notice them until you reflect on their unique and often complex position. Why eunuchs? It's a concept that might feel alien today, but in ancient monarchies, particularly those with large harems or segregated women's quarters, trust was a paramount concern. Kings needed people who could move freely between the public world of male power and the private world of the royal women, without posing a threat to the king's lineage or control over his household. Mainstream historical fact, eunuchs having been castrated, usually in childhood or adolescence, were typically seen as incapable of fathering children, and thus considered less likely to plot dynastic coups involving illegitimate heirs, and crucially could serve within the highly protected Andarun without the risk of compromising the royal women or the king's paternity. This made them invaluable intermediaries and servants in the most intimate parts of the royal household. Their roles were incredibly varied, reflecting the vastness and complexity of the empire they served. You would see eunuchs performing tasks as simple as fanning the king, carrying messages, or guarding doors. Others were highly skilled administrators, scribes, treasurers, or even military commanders. They could rise to positions of immense trust and influence, sometimes wielding more power than many free noblemen precisely because they lacked the traditional family ties that might make a free man a potential rival. They were entirely dependent on the king's favor, often fiercely loyal, because their status and wealth derived solely from him. Within the Andarun, the women's quarters eunuchs were the constant, indispensable staff. They managed the daily lives of the royal wives, concubines, and their children. They oversaw the procurement of clothing, cosmetics, food, and entertainment. They acted as tutors, confidants, and supervisors. For the royal women, including Atossa eunuchs, were their closest male contacts, often serving them from childhood. This created bonds of dependency, familiarity, and sometimes deep trust and affection. Imagine living your entire life within a segregated part of the palace, with only other women and a specific group of men allowed near you. Those men, the eunuchs, would become your link to the outside world, your most reliable servants, and often your closest companions. Their social position was, to put it mildly, paradoxical. They were slaves, often acquired through tribute or conquest, stripped of their reproductive capacity. A fundamental marker of male identity in many cultures. Yet they could achieve wealth, education, and influence far beyond their origins. They were simultaneously insiders, privy to the deepest secrets of the royal family, and outsiders forever marked by their physical difference. A quirky tidbit about their status is that while they were legally slaves, their functional power could be so great that they were sometimes treated with immense deference, blurring the lines of the rigid social hierarchy. You might see a high-ranking eunuch giving orders to free men, a testament to the inverted power dynamics that could exist within the court's walls. It was a system where proximity to the throne could trump inherited status. Life as a eunuch in the Persian court would have been a constant negotiation of this complex identity. They were by definition different, treated with a mixture of trust, disdain, and utility, educated often to a high degree, skilled in administration languages and courtly etiquette, yet barred from the conventional paths of male power based on family and procreation. They were both necessary, and in some views, fundamentally incomplete. This unique status undoubtedly shaped their perspectives and their relationships with the people they served. You observe them moving through the palace with a practiced discretion. Some carry scrolls, others guard doorways with impassive faces. Still others attend closely to the needs of the royal women, their voices soft, their movements deferent yet assured. They are the gears and levers of the palace machine, ensuring its smooth operation often unseen and unheard by the world outside. Their loyalty was considered more reliable than that of nobles who might have their own power bases and ambitions. For a king like Xerxes, dealing with the immense complexity of governing a vast empire, reliable servants in key positions were invaluable. Within the Anderun, the eunuchs were more than just servants. They were woven into the fabric of daily life. They helped the women dress styled, their hair applied, their makeup read to them, played music, oversaw their children, and managed their finances. They were the conduits for communication with the outside world, carrying messages to the king or his officials. They were also the enforcers of the Anderun's rules and security, ensuring that no unauthorized person entered, and that the women remained sequestered as required by custom and royal decree. Historians still argue whether the prominence of eunuchs in the Persian court was primarily for security and control, particularly over the royal family and treasury, or if it also reflected a pragmatic recognition of their potential administrative skills honed by their unique upbringing and education within the palace system. Were they chosen purely for their perceived lack of threat, or were they actively trained and promoted based on merit, because they were seen as more reliable instruments of the king's will? It's likely a combination of factors, but the debate highlights the ambiguity of their status. Objects of control, who often became powerful agents of the state. Their presence allowed for a level of intimacy and access that no free man could have. They saw the royal women at their most vulnerable in their private moments, away from the formal gaze of the court. They heard the whispers, the confidences, the frustrations, and the quiet joys of life within the gilded cage of the Anderun. This constant proximity meant that some eunuchs developed deep personal relationships with the royal women they served. They became trusted advisors, confidants, sometimes even like surrogate family members in a world where blood ties could be fraught with political danger. The scale of the eunuch staff was immense. The royal household records found at Persepolis detail vast numbers of people employed by the king, and eunuchs formed a significant, albeit sometimes difficult to categorize, portion of this staff. They were part of the king's family, in a symbolic sense his personal slaves, but their responsibilities could extend to the highest levels of state finance or military command. Their unique physical status set them apart from both free men and other slaves, placing them in a liminal space within the social structure of the empire. For someone like Atossa, the queen mother, surrounded by her own extensive retinue within the Anderun, the eunuchs were her immediate support system. They managed her vast household, handled her considerable wealth and property. Royal women could be very wealthy in their own right, and attended to her every need. Among this multitude of servants, guards, and administrators, particular individuals would inevitably stand out. Some would gain her trust, others her disfavor. Over years, perhaps decades of service, certain eunuchs would become fixtures in her life, intimately familiar with her routines, her moods, her desires, and her secrets. You watch the procession of these silent, efficient figures. They are the unseen pillars of the Achaemenid court, enabling the lives of luxury and power lived by the royal family. They are the gatekeepers, the messengers, the organizers, and the confidants. Their lives, marked by a singular physical difference, were dedicated to the service of the King of Kings and his household. It is among these numerous, often anonymous individuals that we find the person who will become central to Atossa's final extraordinary decision. A eunuch whose relationship with the Queen Mother deepened in a way that would transcend the conventional boundaries of master and servant. The stage is set for the story of one particular eunuch to emerge from the background of this vast and complex court. As you move through the vast spaces of the royal palace, observing the intricate dance of power and service, you start to understand how such a complex ecosystem functioned. The thousands of people within its walls, from the highest nobles to the lowliest slaves, all revolved around the center of the royal family. And within the shielded world of the Andarun, the Queen Mother Atossa was a gravitational force in her own right. While the air here is thick with the scent of exotic perfumes and polished wood, you also sense the quiet hum of countless lives dedicated to her comfort and security. Among the legions of servants, guards, attendants, and yes, eunuchs who populated Atossa's immediate world, it's natural to wonder how relationships formed. In a place where your entire life was dictated by the needs and moods of the royal household, where privacy was a rare commodity and genuine connection, even rarer bonds of necessity and proximity, could deepen in unexpected ways. For the royal women, especially those of high status like Atossa, who were kept relatively secluded, the eunuchs were their primary link to the outside world and their constant companions within. Think about it. You are surrounded by women, your rivals, your family members, your attendants, and the only men you interact with on a daily intimate basis are those deemed safe, those physically altered to serve without threatening the dynastic line. Over years, even decades of shared life within these walls, seeing someone through illnesses, celebrations, political intrigues, personal sorrows, a unique form of trust could certainly develop. It wouldn't be like a relationship in the outside world, bound by conventional expectations, but something forged in the hothouse environment of the court. But who among the countless eunuchs serving Atossa might rise to become more than just a trusted servant? The sheer anonymity of most of these individuals in the historical record makes it challenging to pinpoint one specific person. The accounts we have often written by outsiders or much later tend to focus on the kings and queens, the major political players. The lives of servants, even powerful ones like eunuchs, are often left frustratingly blank, their names lost to time or only mentioned in passing. Historians still argue whether the surviving sources provide a complete or biased picture of the influence and personal lives within the Andarun. We mostly rely on Greek sources like Herodotus or Ctesias, who had their own agendas and levels of access. However, the title of our journey tonight hints strongly that such a connection existed, that there was a specific eunuch, someone who became so integral to Atossa's life that their bond is remembered even if the details are sparse or shrouded in legend. He wouldn't have been just any eunuch. He would have been someone who possessed extraordinary discretion, perhaps intelligence, certainly unwavering loyalty, and a capacity for deep understanding of Atossa's complex position and personality. Maybe he was assigned to her service very early in her life, growing up alongside her within the palace. Maybe he was exceptionally skilled in managing her affairs, making him indispensable. Or perhaps it was simply a matter of chemistry, a rare personal connection that transcended the rigid boundaries of their stations. while specific historical sources rarely name a eunuch lover of Atossa, the historical context makes the possibility of a profoundly intimate relationship, emotionally, if not necessarily physically in the conventional sense, entirely plausible. These individuals shared secrets, vulnerabilities, and years of life away from the public eye. A mainstream historical fact is that high-ranking royal women like Atossa possessed their own households and considerable wealth often managed by their chief eunuchs, giving these individuals immense responsibility and access to the queen's most private affairs, managing her estates, her income, her correspondence. These were tasks that demanded absolute trust and could forge a very close working relationship that easily blurred into personal reliance. Imagine him then, not just a face in the crowd of servants, but an individual, perhaps older, perhaps younger than Atossa, quietly competent, always present, but never intrusive. He would know her rhythms, her moods, her preferences better than anyone else. He would hear her unguarded thoughts, witness her moments of weakness or frustration, perhaps even offer quiet counsel. His life, too, would be entirely bound up in hers. His status, his safety, his comfort, all depended on her favor. This shared dependency, this intricate intertwining of their daily existences, could easily foster a unique and powerful bond. A quirky tidbit is that while legally slaves and physically marked, some powerful eunuchs were among the wealthiest individuals in the empire, receiving lavish gifts, grants of land, and holding position that allowed them to accumulate personal fortunes. This economic power could further complicate their relationship with their royal masters, adding another layer of complexity beyond simple servitude. He might be a slave, but he could potentially be a rich and influential one, a king in his own small domain within the larger palace structure. Finding a definitive name for this eunuch, the one central to Atossa's story, is difficult. History as recorded is often focused on the deeds of kings and the wars they fought. The private lives within the Endarun are less well documented, often filtered through rumor or later less reliable accounts. While Ctesias, the Greek physician at the Persian court, did write about the palace and its inhabitants, his accounts are often viewed with skepticism by modern historians due to their sensational nature and discrepancies with other sources. He might have mentioned individuals or incidents that aren't corroborated elsewhere. The identity of Atossa's closest eunuch confidant, let alone a lover, remains elusive in the most solid historical records. However, the idea persists. The historical context allows for it. The very dynamics of the Persian court, with its segregated Andarun and powerful eunuch staff, creates the perfect environment for such a singular, deep, and perhaps unconventional bond to form. He is the shadow figure in Atossa's story, the silent, constant presence who shared her most intimate moments. We may not know his name for certain from the dry records, but the narrative suggests he was there, a person who occupied a unique and irreplaceable space in the Queen Mother's life. It's the kind of relationship that grows over time, isn't it? A slow burn of shared experiences, mutual reliance, and perhaps eventually something akin to love or a profound, exclusive devotion that existed only between them, hidden behind the vast walls of the palace. You've spent some time contemplating the intricate world of the Andarun, picturing the thousands living and working within the palace walls, and the specific, almost inevitable closeness that could develop between a powerful, secluded queen and her most trusted eunuchs. You've seen how these relationships, born of proximity and reliance, could go beyond mere service. But the story tonight isn't just about a queen having a trusted eunuch confidant. or even a deep emotional bond. The promise of the title is bolder, isn't it? It speaks of a eunuch lover and a dramatic final act taking him to the grave. Now this is where we move from the realm of plausible court dynamics into something that feels, well, a bit more like legend, perhaps, or at least a story that has traveled through time, picking up extra sparkle and drama along the way. Consider the sources. When we talk about events that happened over 2 millennia ago, especially private matters within a royal court, we're not sifting through perfectly preserved diaries or unbiased news reports. We're relying on accounts written by outsiders, often Greeks who viewed the Persians with a mixture of awe, fear, and disdain. Herodotus, the father of history, is our main go-to for the Persian Wars era, but even he is sometimes criticized for including juicy anecdotes and hearsay alongside verifiable facts. Ctesias, the Greek physician who actually lived at the Persian court for years, wrote a history of Persia, but his work is notoriously sensational and often contradicts Herodotus. It's like getting your news about the royal family from a tabloid. Maybe there's a kernel of truth in there, but you need to approach it with extreme skepticism. So when a story emerges about something as intimate and unconventional as a powerful queen taking a eunuch lover to her grave, the immediate question that should pop into your sleepy brain is, says who? Where does this specific detail come from? Is it mentioned in a primary source, perhaps one of the few surviving Persian records, or is it something found in a later Greek account, possibly embellished for dramatic effect, or even invented? The truth is, nailing down the historical veracity of this specific claim is difficult. The most detailed accounts of Persian court life often come from these Greek writers who might have had limited access to the deepest secrets of the Endarun. They might have been relaying gossip they heard from disgruntled courtiers, or even making things up to make their histories more entertaining, or to portray the Persian court in a certain light, perhaps as decadent or strange from a Greek perspective. Remember, ancient historians had different standards than modern ones. Entertainment value and moral lessons often trumped factual accuracy in the way we understand it today. Therefore, the core question, was there a eunuch lover, and did Atossa specifically ensure he would share her tomb, falls squarely into that fascinating, frustrating category of ancient history where fact and legend intertwine. It's a classic example of something where historians still argue whether the surviving accounts are reliable historical records or later fabrications or embellishments. Was there a very close, perhaps even deeply affectionate relationship with a eunuch? Absolutely plausible, as we discussed. Did that relationship cross conventional lines in a way that onlookers interpreted as love possible? Did Atossa then make the unprecedented decision to have this individual killed and buried with her? This is the part that strains the historical evidence the most. There's no clear, undisputed primary source from the time that definitively states Queen Atossa had a eunuch lover named X, and upon her death, he was killed and entombed with her. The story in its most dramatic form often appears in later retellings or interpretations based on fragmented or less reliable sources. Think of how stories evolve over time. A trusted confidant becomes a secret lover. A close bond becomes a forbidden passion. A request for loyal service in the afterlife becomes a forced sacrifice. It's the historical equivalent of Chinese whispers played out over centuries and across cultures. A mainstream historical fact is that the Achaemenid Persians did practice elaborate burials for their royalty, often interring them with valuable possessions, servants, and even family members, depending on the era and specific king. However, the idea of specifically executing a lover or trusted servant, solely to accompany them into the afterlife, wasn't a universally documented or standard Persian practice in the same way, say, Egyptian pharaohs sometimes had servants interred with them in earlier periods. So while royal burials were complex affairs, this specific detail feels distinct and perhaps sensationalized. A quirky tidbit related to sources is that Ctesias, who might be a source for some elements of stories about the Andarun, was known for his dramatic flair. One historian described his work as a medley of truth and falsehood, focusing on lurid tales and palace intrigues that often sound more like soap opera plots than sober history. He was writing for a Greek audience fascinated by the exotic East, and scandalous stories about the Persian court would certainly sell well. So if a story about a queen taking a eunuch lover to her grave pops up primarily in accounts influenced by Ctesias, you have to raise a skeptical eyebrow, even if you're drifting off to sleep. The story of Atossa and her eunuch in its dramatic form could easily be a product of this historical filter, a real deep connection exaggerated by rumor, misinterpreted by outsiders, and sensationalized by later writers. It makes for a much better story, doesn't it? A powerful queen, a forbidden love, a tragic, dramatic ending. It's far more compelling than just, Queen Mother had a really good assistant who managed her accounts. So this isn't to say there was nothing there, merely that the specific dramatic narrative might be more rooted in the legends and interpretations that grew around historical figures than in provable fact. It exists in that blurry space between what might have happened and what later generations wanted or believed happened, fueled by rumor and biased sources. So as you settle deeper under the covers, know that the story you're hearing isn't a certified, notarized fact, but a captivating tale that historians are still trying to untangle from the web of ancient accounts. So you've just drifted through the hazy world of ancient sources, grappling with the idea that the most dramatic part of our story tonight, the eunuch lover to the grave bit, might be more historical whisper than verified fact. You've considered the biases of Greek writers like Ctesias, who maybe preferred a scandalous yarn to sober truth, and the difficulty of knowing what really happened behind those thick palace walls, especially in the Andarun. It leaves you with a question hanging in the air, much like a forgotten silk scarf. If the story of Queen Atossa taking her eunuch lover to the grave isn't a straightforward historical fact, then where does it come from? Why does this particular tale persist, and who else might be involved, or perhaps misidentified? Think about how rumors spread, even today. A tiny seed of truth. Maybe a queen was particularly fond of a certain eunuch. Perhaps she relied on him heavily. Maybe she even showed him unusual favor or affection of a non-romantic kind. Gets passed around, gets twisted, gets exaggerated. Over time, in the hands of gossips and storytellers, a trusted advisor can become a forbidden love, and a request for posthumous loyalty can morph into a forced, macabre sacrifice. It's the ancient world's version of clickbait, designed to capture attention and reinforce certain narratives, perhaps about the supposed decadence or cruelty of foreign powers. Now, if it wasn't Atossa in this exact dramatic scenario, could it have been another queen? The Achaemenid dynasty spanned several centuries, and there were many powerful women within the royal family, especially the queen mothers, who often wielded significant influence. Could this story, or elements of it, actually belong to a different era or a different queen? Ancient historians, even the more careful ones, sometimes conflated individuals or events across generations, especially when relying on oral traditions or patchy records. It's possible the tale got attached to Atossa precisely because she was one of the most famous and politically significant Persian queens, known to the Greeks, wife of Darius the Great and mother of Xerxes. She was a figure of known power and intrigue, making her a perfect canvas for dramatic, perhaps invented stories. Could the eunuch lover part be a metaphorical interpretation in a culture where eunuchs often held positions of immense trust and proximity, and where women in the Anderun were largely cut off from other men? The bond between a queen and her chief eunuch could be incredibly deep and intimate in a non-sexual way. It could be the closest relationship she had outside of her immediate family, a partnership built on shared secrets, political maneuvering, and mutual dependence. Could Greek observers, or later historians, misinterpret this intense, unique bond through the lens of their own cultural understanding of relationships, sexualizing it or framing it as a love affair, simply because it was so unusually close and powerful? It's like watching a nature documentary and mistaking two animal friends for a romantic couple because you're projecting human ideas onto them. Another possibility is that the story refers to a different, dramatic incident involving a queen and a eunuch. There are other tales, scattered throughout classical sources about the Persian court, that involve eunuchs in positions of power, intrigue, and sometimes tragedy. For instance, some accounts mention eunuchs involved in palace conspiracies or acting as key intermediaries in political power struggles, while none directly mirror the buried alive narrative associated with Atossa. They highlight the prominent and complex role eunuchs played, a role that could easily become the subject of dramatic, even fictionalized accounts. Could a story about a loyal eunuch being executed for some political reason, perhaps related to a queen's downfall or succession struggle, have been warped into the buried alive with her narrative? A mainstream historical fact that provides some context here is that the Achaemenid court was indeed known for its elaborate and sometimes brutal power struggles. Succession crises, internal conspiracies, and the influence of palace figures, including eunuchs, were documented realities. Royal history wasn't always a smooth handover. It could be fraught with danger, betrayal, and dramatic endings for those on the wrong side. This turbulent reality of court life could easily provide fertile ground for sensational stories, blending truth with exaggeration. Consider the reign of Xerxes, Atossa's son. His court was a hotbed of political intrigue, and Greek sources like Herodotus and Ctesias describe numerous dramatic events, including assassinations, rebellions, and the manipulation of the king by various factions, often involving individuals within the palace. While the specific story of the eunuch buried alive isn't firmly placed in this era with undeniable proof regarding Atossa, the kind of dramatic, often violent tales emanating from Xerxes' court underscores the environment where such a story could plausibly gain traction, whether true or not. A quirky or fringe tidbit in this area relates to the names themselves. Ancient Persian names, especially royal ones, were sometimes confused or given different Greek transliterations. It's theoretically possible that a story about a different royal woman, perhaps with a similar-sounding name or title, became mistakenly associated with the famous Atossa. Imagine trying to keep track of all the Marys or Johns in a royal lineage over centuries without clear records. Names get mixed up, stories get attached to the most prominent figure, and suddenly a tale that belonged to Queen A is now attributed to Queen B, simply because their names sounded vaguely alike to a foreign ear centuries later. And so we find ourselves contemplating that space where history becomes legend. The specific claim that Atossa took a eunuch lover to the grave is one where historians still argue whether it's a genuine historical event, a misattribution, a symbolic story, or a complete fabrication designed to entertain or portray the Persian court in a specific light. There's no smoking gun, no ancient Persian tomb inscription that reads, "Here lies Queen Atossa, and next to her, her faithful eunuch, name, who joined her in death. The evidence is circumstantial, found in sources known for their sensationalism or possible bias. It's like trying to piece together a crime from whispers heard down a long corridor centuries later. You hear fragments. A queen, a eunuch, a tragic end, buried together. But were they lovers? Was he killed specifically for this purpose? Was it Atossa at all? The specific dramatic version feels like the kind of story that gets told and retold because it's compelling, because it taps into themes of power, forbidden relationships, and death. It's a tale designed to send a shiver down your spine, to make you think about the strange and exotic ways of distant empires. So as you settle deeper into your bed, let the uncertainty of this specific detail wash over you. Was there a grain of truth? Perhaps a queen had a devoted eunuch companion, so indispensable that she wished for him to somehow remain with her. A wish twisted over time into a story of forced death. Or was it simply a dramatic flourish added by a historian looking to spice up their narrative and appeal to a Greek audience fascinated by the perceived excesses of the Persian court? We may never know for sure, and that's part of the quiet mystery of ancient history. The truth, like the deepest secrets of the Andaron, remains partially obscured by the mists of time and the filter of those who chose to write the stories down. And sometimes the legend itself becomes the enduring part of the history, regardless of its factual accuracy. So you've just been marinating in the glorious uncertainty of it all, haven't you? That hazy historical space where fact blurs into fiction, and you're left wondering if the juiciest part of the story you settled in for is even true. You've wrestled with the idea that the tale of a queen taking her eunuch lover to the grave might be a garbled rumor, a misattributed event, or even just a made-up bit of ancient gossip designed to sell scrolls. And you're left scratching your head thinking, okay, if that dramatic bit is shaky, where do we get our information about Queen Atossa, the powerful woman at the heart of this whole narrative? Well, pull that blanket up a little closer. Because much of what we think we know about Atossa, especially her political influence and her place within the Achaemenid dynasty, comes from one particularly famous ancient Greek writer. We're talking about a guy often called the father of history. That's your mainstream historical fact for this section, by the way, Herodotus of Halicarnassus. He wrote a massive work simply titled The Histories, which is our most detailed classical source on the Greco-Persian Wars, and provides a ton of information, some of it wonderfully juicy, some of it, well, let's just say he liked a good story, even if the footnotes were a bit shaky. Herodotus traveled quite a bit, chatted with all sorts of people, Greeks, Persians, Egyptians, you name it, and compiled accounts of different cultures, geographies, and crucially for us, the burgeoning conflict between the Greek city-states and the mighty Persian Empire under kings like Darius and Xerxes. He's our primary guide to the Persian court from a Greek perspective during this absolutely pivotal period. And because Atossa was the daughter of Cyrus the Great, the wife of 3 different kings, Cambyses, Gaumata Smerdis, and most importantly, Darius and the mother of King Xerxes, she pops up in Herodotus's narrative quite a bit. She wasn't just some face in the palace crowd. She was a major player in the royal family. Now what does Herodotus tell us about Atossa? He certainly paints a picture of a woman with significant influence. He recounts how after Darius seized the throne, he solidified his position by marrying Atossa. This wasn't just for love, though who knows what happened behind closed doors. More importantly, marrying Cyrus's daughter gave Darius a crucial link to the founder of the empire, lending legitimacy to his rule, which was, shall we say, acquired through a bit of a coup. Atossa wasn't just a consort. She was a dynastic anchor. Herodotus notes this marriage and her lineage as important factors in Darius's reign. But the really interesting part from Herodotus's perspective is Atossa's role in influencing Darius's decisions. Herodotus tells a specific story about Atossa having a health issue, a lump or abscess on her breast. She was reluctant to show it to anyone. Then a Greek physician named Democedes of Croton, who was living at the Persian court, a whole fascinating story in itself. He was enslaved and brought to Persia, then became the royal physician, managed to gain her trust, and successfully treated her. According to Herodotus, Atossa was so grateful that she promised to grant Democedes anything he wished. And what did the clever Greek physician wish for? Not gold, not jewels, but permission to return to his homeland in Greece. But he didn't just ask for himself. He used Atossa's influence to push Darius towards launching an expedition against Greece. He argued that Darius, having conquered so much already, should aim for Greece to cement his legacy. Herodotus depicts Democedes persuading Atossa to persuade Darius. He suggests Atossa repeatedly pressed Darius, telling him he should use his power to conquer, more specifically mentioning Greece, perhaps subtly guided by Democedes' suggestions. The story, as told by Herodotus, presents Atossa as a woman who could bend the king's ear, who had the power to influence policy and potentially shape the future of the empire by advocating for military campaigns. It portrays her not just as a queen, but as a political force, albeit one who operated through the king. Whether the specific anecdote about Democedes and her illness is entirely true, or a bit of Greek storytelling designed to give a Greek physician credit for initiating the wars, it highlights Herodotus's perception of Atossa as an influential figure. Now here's the million-drachma question, the one that brings us back to our sleepy time mystery. In all of Herodotus's detailed accounts of Atossa, her lineage, her marriages, her health problems, her conversations with Darius about conquering Greece, her status as the mother of Xerxes, making her even more important. Does he mention anything? Anything at all about her having a eunuch lover or taking a eunuch to the grave with her? The answer is a resounding nope. Not a word. This is incredibly significant. Herodotus provides us with the most substantial and widely accepted historical portrait of Atossa from antiquity. He spent time gathering information related to the Persian court. He was interested in dramatic and notable events, and he clearly saw Atossa as important enough to feature in his narrative and attribute significant influence to her. If such a sensational, morbid, and politically charged event as a queen burying a eunuch lover alive with her had occurred, especially involving someone as prominent as Atossa, you would expect Herodotus, the guy writing the history of the era, to have heard about it. And if he heard about it, given his penchant for including intriguing and sometimes questionable stories, you would expect him to have included it. His silence on this specific matter is a really strong piece of circumstantial evidence, suggesting that the story of the eunuch being buried alive with Atossa as a romantic partner wasn't something widely known or believed by the people Herodotus spoke to, or perhaps that it simply hadn't happened in that dramatic form at all during Atossa's lifetime or immediately thereafter. So if Herodotus doesn't tell this story, where does it come from? This is where we often turn to other, less reliable sources. The most likely candidate for propagating the eunuch lover to the grave narrative, particularly in its more lurid details, is another Greek writer named Ctesias of Cnidus. There's your quirky or fringe tidbit. Ctesias was a Greek physician who served at the Persian court of Artaxerxes II Menemon, roughly a century after. Atossa and Xerxes. He wrote a history of Persia Persica that survives only in fragments and summaries. Ctesias's account of Persia often differs wildly from Herodotus's, and he was known for including fantastical elements, palace intrigues, and highly dramatized events. Ancient and modern historians alike have often questioned Ctesias's reliability, sometimes dismissing him as a sensationalist or even a fabulist who preferred exciting tales over strict accuracy, perhaps relying on court gossip rather than official records, while Herodotus is considered flawed and sometimes prone to exaggeration or misunderstanding. Persian customs, Ctesias is on a different level of skepticism for many scholars. Historians still argue whether Ctesias provides genuinely alternative, albeit biased, insights into the Persian court, or whether he largely fabricated or heavily distorted his information for dramatic effect, or to present a particular view of the Persians. That's your historians still argue phrase. The dramatic story of a queen burying a eunuch lover alive feels very much like the kind of tale that would originate in a source like Ctesias, rather than Herodotus. It has that touch of the scandalous and the cruel that Greek writers sometimes attributed to the Eastern empires. Consider the context. Greek writers were often writing for a Greek audience that was fascinated by, but also wary of and sometimes hostile towards the vast, rich, and seemingly autocratic Persian Empire. Stories highlighting the perceived luxury, decadence, or cruelty of the Persian court could serve a narrative purpose, making the Greeks look better by comparison, or justifying their resistance to Persian power. A tale of a powerful queen engaging in a forbidden relationship and a brutal forced burial fits this kind of framework perfectly. It's good drama, but is it good history? Herodotus's silence makes it less likely. It's possible, of course, that the story existed in some form but wasn't known to Herodotus, or that he chose to omit it for reasons we can't know. Perhaps it was a highly guarded secret, though that seems unlikely for such a dramatic event. Or maybe the story evolved over time, becoming attached to the most famous Queen Atossa long after Herodotus wrote his history with Ctesias, or later writers being the ones to record the more sensational version. So as you weigh the possibilities, the absence of the eunuch to the grave story in Herodotus's detailed account of Atossa is a major hurdle for anyone wanting to claim it as solid historical fact. Herodotus gives us a glimpse into a powerful, influential woman who played a role in shaping the Persian Empire's trajectory. But the most dramatic, attention-grabbing detail about her alleged love life and a morbid burial seems conspicuously absent from our most important early source. It nudges the story further into the realm of legend or later historical gossip, a cautionary tale about relying on sensational details unless they are corroborated by more reliable sources. And as you drift, you can let the quiet fact of Herodotus's silence speak volumes about the true historical basis of this specific dramatic claim. Okay, so you've just settled into the unsettling quiet of Herodotus's silence. You were hoping for fireworks, for the definitive juicy confirmation from the guy widely considered the OG historian, the one who was there, or at least closer to there than we are now. And nothing. Not a whisper about a buried eunuch lover attached to Queen Atossa. It's like ordering a ridiculously elaborate dessert and being served plain toast. A bit anticlimactic for your journey into the land of boring history, isn't it? But that silence in history is often more meaningful than the loudest claims. It makes you wonder if Herodotus, the gossip extraordinaire of the ancient world, didn't hear this tale. Where did it come from? Well, remember how we just briefly mentioned another guy, Ctesias of Cnidus. Let's pull him out of the shadows, shall we? Think of Herodotus as the relatively earnest, though still capable of spinning a yarn documentary filmmaker of ancient Persia. Ctesias, on the other hand, imagine him as more of a reality TV producer, maybe focusing on palace drama and slightly salacious scandals. He's our main alternative ancient source for Persian history during this period, but he comes with a reputation, a big, flashing, unreliable reputation. Now, who was Ctesias? Here's your mainstream historical fact for this section. He was a Greek physician just like Democedes, who we mentioned earlier, who ended up serving at the court of the Persian king, Artaxerxes II Mnemen. This was roughly a century after the time of Atossa and her son Xerxes. So he was physically in the Persian court, which sounds promising, right? Direct access. However, his perspective was different. His access was to a later generation, and crucially, his account of Persian history, called Persica, was compiled from what he claimed were official court records and his own observations. But the Persica doesn't survive intact. We only have fragments quoted by later authors and summaries written by others, like the Byzantine scholar Photius centuries later. Relying on Ctesias is like trying to piece together a historical documentary from snippets on TikTok and vague descriptions from someone who watched it years ago. It's challenging, and those challenges are significant. From antiquity, historians have been scratching their heads about Ctesias. Plutarch, another ancient biographer, directly contrasts Ctesias with Herodotus, often finding Ctesias less credible. Modern scholars tend to agree. Ctesias's numbers for battles are often wildly different from Herodotus's and seem less plausible. His chronology is sometimes messy. His description of Persian customs and geography occasionally feel off, as if he's misunderstood or invented things. And perhaps most importantly for our story, his narrative is packed with personal dramas, palace conspiracies, assassinations, poisonings, and generally sensational events that sometimes read more like historical romance novels than sober accounts. He loved a good villain, a secret plot, and a dramatic death scene. So while Herodotus's silence on the eunuch burial is notable, Ctesias's potential inclusion of such a story would be less surprising. It fits his pattern. Why would he include such things? Well, maybe he did. Hear court gossip about forbidden relationships or unusual burial practices. Palaces then, as now, were hotbeds of rumor. Or maybe knowing his Greek audience's appetite for tales of Eastern exoticism and intrigue, he embellished or even invented details to make his history more exciting, more readable, and perhaps more critical of the Persian rulers he served, but was culturally distinct from. Imagine pitching a history book, The Wars and Reigns of Kings, versus shocking palace scandals, Queen Berry's lover alive. One definitely sells better at the ancient equivalent of the airport bookstore. Here's your quirky or fringe tidbit for this section. One of the striking things about Ctesias is that he presents a very different version of many key events and characters compared to Herodotus, and often portrays Persian figures in a much more negative light. While Herodotus tries often successfully to present a somewhat balanced view, acknowledging Persian achievements and customs, Ctesias seems more inclined to depict the Persian court as a place of cruelty, decadence, and internal backstabbing. This has led some to speculate. His account is colored by personal grudges, misunderstandings, or a deliberate attempt to appeal to Greek prejudices against Persians, especially during a time when relations between the Greek states and the Achaemenid Empire were often tense or outright hostile. It makes you wonder if his official court records were actually just the spiciest whispers he overheard in the waiting room outside the king's chambers. Given Ctesias's penchant for the dramatic, and his questionable reliability compared to Herodotus, the story of a queen burying a eunuch lover alive fits comfortably into the category of tales more likely to appear in Ctesias's Persica, or in later historical traditions that were influenced by his more sensational style, rather than in Herodotus's work. It has the elements. Ctesias seemed to favor a powerful woman, a forbidden relationship. Eunuchs were royal property, and often seen as outside conventional social norms regarding relationships, a macabre and dramatic ending. Now it's important to be precise here, because as we've noted, Ctesias's work is fragmented. The specific story about Atossa burying a eunuch lover might not survive in the direct fragments we have of Ctesias writing about Atossa. Our knowledge of this particular tale often comes from later sources who might have read Ctesias or were part of a tradition that relied on Ctesias's work or similar types of courtly gossip and scandalous history. But the type of story and the general level of sensationalism it represents is absolutely characteristic of the material Ctesias was known for including. So while we can't point to a surviving sentence in Ctesias saying, "And Queen Atossa, she buried her favorite eunuch who was secretly her lover," the idea that this sort of tale originates in the less reliable, more scandal-driven tradition represented by Ctesias, as opposed to the relatively more grounded history of Herodotus, is a strong one. This brings us to another point of scholarly debate, your historians still argue phrase. Historians still argue whether Ctesias provides any genuinely valuable information, or if he is largely useless as a historical source, a fabulist whose work should be discarded entirely. Some argue that even with all the exaggeration, Ctesias might have preserved some genuine court traditions, names, or events that aren't mentioned elsewhere, offering a different, albeit heavily biased, perspective. Others say his inaccuracies are so pervasive that it's impossible to sift fact from fiction, and relying on him is simply too risky. This debate becomes particularly pointed when Ctesias contradicts Herodotus, which he does frequently. Who do you trust? The guy who traveled and interviewed many people, but might misunderstand Persian culture, or the guy who lived in the court, but seemed obsessed with scandal, and might have just made things up or repeated wild rumors for our specific story, Ctesias's association with it, or the tradition that values such sensational tales, puts it on much shakier ground than if Herodotus had reported it. Herodotus, for all his flaws, was trying to give a comprehensive account of the Persian Empire and the wars. He included customs, geography, and political decisions alongside dramatic stories. Ctesias seems to have prioritized the drama above, all else often at the expense of plausibility or accuracy. So as you let this sink in, consider the historical weight. On one hand, you have Herodotus, our most important early source for Atossa and the Persian court, who is silent on the eunuch burial. On the other hand, you have Ctesias, a later less reliable source known for sensationalism, who represents the type of historical tradition where such a dramatic and questionable tale is much more likely to originate. The balance of historical evidence tips strongly against the eunuch to the grave story being a solid fact about Atossa. It feels much more like a story that emerged from the more gossipy, scandal-focused fringes of ancient historical writing, perhaps attributed to the most famous queen of the era, to give it more punch. It's a recurring theme in history, isn't it? The most lurid, captivating stories are often the ones with the least evidence supporting them. Our brains are hardwired for drama, for forbidden love, and tragic ends, for secrets whispered in palace corridors. And ancient writers like Ctesias knew this just like modern headline writers do. They knew what would grab attention, and a queen bearing her secret lover alive. That's ancient clickbait right there. But when you lie here trying to find the truth behind the tale, the quiet absence in the more reliable account of Herodotus is more historically loud than all the potential sensationalism from the fragments of Ctesias and the traditions he inspired. It's a reminder that history is less about collecting the juiciest stories and more about critically evaluating where those stories come from. And in this case, the source points away from solid fact and towards fascinating but likely unfounded legend. So we've put Ctesias in his box labeled less reliable, more dramatic. But the story didn't just pop into existence fully formed from a single whispered rumor in Artaxerxes III's court a century after Atossa's time. Our understanding of what Ctesias wrote and how stories like the Eunuch burial might have been transmitted relies heavily on people who came much, much later. Remember how we don't have Ctesias's Persica intact. It's like having a favorite old photo album, the band that got mostly destroyed, and all you have left are faded scraps and your grandma's sometimes confused descriptions of what the missing pictures showed. This brings us to the crucial role of those later writers, the ones who preserved fragments of Ctesias's work or summarized it. The two big names here are Photius and Diodorus Siculus. Think of Photius, a Byzantine scholar and patriarch of Constantinople in the 9th century AD, over 1,000 years after Ctesias. He read a lot of ancient books that don't survive today, including Ctesias's Persica, and he wrote summaries and critiques of them in his work called the Myriobiblon, or Bibliotheca. So a huge chunk of what we know about Ctesias's account of Persian history comes from Photius's summary. It's like getting the plot of an ancient movie from a guy who saw it once a millennium ago and is just telling you the main points he remembers. He might skip details, emphasize different things than Ctesias did, or even misunderstand parts. He's essentially our main window into the structure and content of Ctesias's Persica. The other key figure is Diodorus Siculus, a Greek historian writing in the 1st century BC, still centuries after Ctesias, but much closer than Photius. Diodorus wrote a massive universal history called the Bibliotheca Historica. For his sections on Persian history, he drew upon earlier sources, and one of his main sources for the Persian period was Ctesias. So Diodorus's narrative often incorporates Ctesias's account, sometimes paraphrasing or summarizing it. This means we get another perspective on Ctesias embedded within Diodorus's own history. It's like getting that same movie plot, but this time from a different friend who saw it, who might focus on different characters or scenes than the first friend. Comparing Photius's summary to how Diodorus uses Ctesias can be really helpful, but it also adds layers of interpretation. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this section. Photius's Bibliotheca is an absolutely invaluable resource for classical scholarship because it provides summaries or mentions of hundreds of ancient works that are now lost. Without Photius, our knowledge of many ancient authors, including Ctesias, but also many others, would be dramatically poorer. He's like the ultimate literary archaeologist, meticulously cataloging treasures that would otherwise be buried forever. It's a testament to the power of preservation, even if that preservation is just a detailed summary. Now, relying on these later sources creates some interesting challenges. First, Photius and Diodorus weren't just passively copying Ctesias. They were selecting, summarizing, and interpreting his work based on their own purposes and perspectives. Photius was creating a library index and offering critical reviews. Diodorus was weaving a continuous historical narrative. They might have omitted things they found unbelievable, boring or irrelevant to their own goals. They might have accidentally introduced errors or changed the emphasis of Ctesias's original text. Second, the surviving fragments and summaries don't always line up perfectly. There are discrepancies between Photius's account of Ctesias and how Diodorus seems to use Ctesias. This makes reconstructing Ctesias's original words and intentions incredibly difficult. It's like trying to figure out exactly what a band's concert set list was based on two friends describing it afterwards. One focused on the deep cuts, the other only remembers the hits, and neither can agree on the order. Here's your quirky or fringe tidbit for this section. Photius, in his summary of Ctesias, actually provides some of the strongest criticisms of Ctesias's work, calling him full of lies and noting his inconsistencies with Herodotus and other historians. So the very person who helped preserve Ctesias's history for us also explicitly warned us not to trust him too much. Imagine if the person archiving all your old social media posts added a disclaimer saying, "Warning, user often exaggerated, misrepresented facts, and probably wasn't even at half the parties they claimed to be at." One, it's a helpful warning, but also slightly undermines the archive itself, doesn't it? So when we talk about the story of Atossa burying a eunuch lover and its potential link to Ctesias, we're often talking about what Photius or Diodorus or other even later writers drawing on this tradition. Say, Ctesias said, or what aligns with the kind of story Ctesias was known for including. The specific detail of Atossa and the eunuch might not be one of the directly quoted fragments, but it might be something mentioned in Photius's summary or hinted at in how Diodorus structures his narrative around Ctesias, or it could be a story that later historical traditions attributed to Ctesias because it sounded like the kind of thing he'd write about. This layered transmission is crucial. It means the story of the eunuch burial is not only potentially originating with a less reliable historian, Ctesias, but is also filtered through centuries of later writers who might have interpreted, altered, or even added to the original material. The further a story gets from its alleged source, and the more times it's retold or summarized, the more opportunities there are for changes, misunderstandings, or embellishments. Think about a game of historical telephone. Ctesias hears a rumor or invents a story. He writes it down. Diodorus reads it centuries later and incorporates it into his history. Photius reads Ctesias even later and summarizes it, noting its difference from Herodotus. Later historians read Photius and Diodorus and repeat the story, perhaps adding their own interpretations or attributing it definitively to Ctesias, even if it wasn't explicitly stated in the fragments we have. By the time the story reaches us, it's been through so many filters that it's hard to know what, if any, kernel of truth might have existed at the very beginning. This is where the scholarly debate your historians still argue phrase gets even more intricate. Historians still argue about the precise relationship between Ctesias, Diodorus, and Photius regarding specific events, and whether later writers correctly understood or represented Ctesias's original text. Some scholars meticulously compare every phrase in Photius's summary to every related passage in Diodorus to try and reconstruct what Ctesias must have written. Others are more skeptical, arguing that the layers of transmission are so thick and the discrepancies so significant that we can never be truly confident about what Ctesias actually said, let alone whether what he said was true. This debate is particularly challenging when dealing with the more sensational elements attributed to Ctesias, like palace scandals, because these are the very things that later writers might have been most likely to sensationalize further, or even invent and attribute to the already known as sensational Ctesias. So the fact that the eunuch burial story is linked to the Ctesias tradition, which we primarily know through Photius and Diodorus, adds another layer of doubt. It's not just, did Ctesias write this, but also did Photius Diodorus correctly represent what Ctesias wrote? And did later writers correctly attribute this story to the Ctesias tradition? Each step away from the supposed original source weakens the story's claim to historical fact. It reinforces the idea that this tale belongs more in the realm of legendary gossip about the Persian court, amplified and transmitted through later centuries, rather than being a solid historical event. As you drift deeper into this thought, consider the implications for how we consume history. The most accessible versions, the ones with the most drama and scandal, are often those that have been filtered and amplified over time, sometimes losing accuracy in the process. The quieter, perhaps more reliable accounts, like Herodotus's relative silence, require more careful attention and critical thought. They don't shout for attention. They simply exist waiting for you to notice what they don't say, which can often tell you as much as what they do. The story of Atossa's buried eunuch passed down through the prenatally unreliable Ctesias via the filters of Photius and Diodorus is a perfect example of a fascinating tale that dissolves under the light of source criticism, leaving you with not a buried lover, but a buried historical mystery. The dust hasn't quite settled from the upheaval, the kind of dramatic empire-shaking turmoil that makes even the most seasoned courtier need a stiff drink, or perhaps in this era, some very strong date wine. Darius, the one who emerged victorious from the multi-way fight for the throne, now sits on the peacock throne, but his position, while secured by force, needs cementing with legitimacy. He's a brilliant military commander, a superb administrator, a builder of grand visions, but he's not directly descended from Cyrus the Great, in the same way Cambyses or the supposed Bardia were. He's from a collateral branch of the Achaemenid family, a cousin, essentially. This matters a lot, because in this world, blood is everything, and the purest, most potent royal blood belongs to Atossa, daughter of the founder himself. You see the political gears grinding. Darius needs to knit the empire back together, restore order, and prevent future challenges. What better way to signal continuity, to reassure the old guard to link his reign directly to the glory days of Cyrus, than by marrying the most prominent surviving daughter of the great king? It's a power move, wrapped in a wedding veil. So the arrangements are made. Atossa, who has navigated the treacherous waters of one marriage, possibly a second to a usurper, now finds herself betrothed to the man who seized the throne and is setting out to rule a vast, diverse empire. This isn't a quiet affair. It's a state event, a grand pronouncement. By taking Atossa as his wife, Darius isn't just gaining a consort. He's acquiring the ultimate symbol of dynastic legitimacy. He's essentially saying, I am now linked by marriage to the very source of Achaemenid power. My rule flows from Cyrus via his daughter. You watch as she transitions from being a princess, then a potentially vulnerable figure during a coup, to becoming the queen of the Persian Empire. Not just a queen, but the queen, the principal wife, the one who brings the crucial bloodline. Her status is unparalleled among Darius's many wives, because let's be real, kings of this era had multiple wives, often for political reasons, collecting princesses from various subject lands like fancy stamps. Atossa is the gem in the collection, the one who holds the keys to the kingdom's past and potentially its future. Life at court under Darius takes on a different rhythm. After the chaos of the succession crisis, Darius is all about order, administration, and grand scale. He's the guy who organizes everything, builds roads, standardizes coinage, sets up a sophisticated postal system, creates the famous satrapies provinces with their watchful king's eyes and ears, keeping tabs on the local governors. If Cyrus was the visionary conqueror, Darius is the master architect of the functioning empire. Mainstream historical fact. Darius the Great is renowned for his administrative genius. He reorganized the Achaemenid Empire into roughly 20 satrapies, each paying a fixed tribute. He implemented legal reforms, standardized weights and measures, and oversaw massive infrastructure projects like the Royal Road and the beginnings of Persepolis. This systematic approach solidified the vast territories into a manageable, prosperous state that would endure for centuries. He took the raw power of conquest and turned it into sustainable governance. Within this newly organized, burgeoning court, Atossa holds a position of significant influence. She is not just a trophy wife. As the daughter of Cyrus, she commands immense respect. She is part of the inner circle, a confidant to Darius, a figure of authority within the vast royal household. The women's quarters are still her domain, a complex world of concubines, other wives, eunuchs, and servants, but her authority there is supreme. She is the primary queen-mother figure, even before she has sons. Whispers and intrigues still swirl, of course. This is a royal court, not a particularly exciting book club. There are always factions vying for influence, rivals for Darius's attention, potential challengers lurking in the shadows. But Atossa, with her lineage and her sharp political mind, which she must have possessed to survive the previous few years, navigates this environment with skill. She understands the power dynamics, the importance of alliances, the subtle art of courtly influence. Think of her as the ultimate power broker behind the scenes. While Darius is out conquering or building, she is managing the domestic power base, ensuring loyalty within the household, perhaps even offering shrewd advice on political matters. The historical sources don't give us a diary of her daily life. Sadly, dear papyrus roll. Ugh, another boring banquet. That ambassador from Lydia smells terrible. But they hint at her significance. She wasn't just sitting around polishing her tiara. And then, the future arrives. Atossa gives birth to a son. For Darius, who already has older sons from previous marriages, this is a monumental event. Why? Because this son is not just the king's son. He is also the grandson of Cyrus the Great, through his daughter, the principal queen. This lineage makes him the most legitimate candidate for the throne, the one who links Darius's line most directly back to the founder. This son is Xerxes. The birth of Xerxes dramatically solidifies Atossa's position and shapes the future of the empire. Suddenly there is a clear, indisputable heir apparent, one whose claim is bolstered by the blood of both Darius and Cyrus. This helps prevent the kind of succession crisis that brought Darius to power in the first place. It's like finally having a clearly labeled "Next King" signpost after years of everyone pointing in different directions. A quirky tidbit. It's widely believed that Darius, despite having older sons from a previous marriage to the daughter of his horsemaster, Gobryas, one of the conspirators who helped him seize the throne, designated Xerxes as his successor, primarily because Atossa was Xerxes's mother. Herodotus specifically mentions Atossa's great authority and attributes the choice of Xerxes as heir to her influence. This highlights just how crucial her lineage and perhaps her personal power was in this male-dominated world. Life takes on a rhythm centered around the growing empire and the upbringing of the royal children, especially Xerxes. You might see tutors being vetted, hear the sounds of training in the courtyards, observe the meticulous rituals surrounding the royal family. Atossa is central to this, overseeing the education and preparation of the boy who is destined to rule half the known world. She is shaping the next king. The empire is expanding, consolidating. News arrives of campaigns in Greece, the first Persian invasion, culminating in the Battle of Marathon. A less than ideal day for Darius, to put it mildly, like showing up to a party and realizing you're wearing the same toga as 3 other people, but much, much worse. Trade flourishes, tribute pours in from subject nations, and architectural marvels like Persepolis begin to rise, a city built purely as a ceremonial capital, a place for the king to host dignitaries and show off the wealth and power of the empire. You can observe the building process at Persepolis. Imagine the scale: enormous stone columns, intricate carvings, vast halls designed to impress and awe. This isn't just a palace. It's a statement. It says, "We are the rulers of the world, and we build things that will last forever." Atossa would have seen this city grow, perhaps even influenced some of its design or layout. Her presence would have been felt in the royal apartments being prepared, the gardens being planned. Historians still argue whether Atossa's influence over Darius was primarily due to her being Cyrus's daughter, her personal intelligence and political acumen, or a combination of both. Was she consulted on major policy decisions, or was her influence more limited to court appointments and succession issues? The ancient sources provide glimpses, but they are frustratingly brief and often filtered through the perspective of male writers, many of whom were Greek and may have held biases about powerful women. Pinpointing the exact nature and extent of her day-to-day influence remains a subject of scholarly debate. Regardless of the precise level of her direct political power, her status is undeniable. She is the mother of the heir, the daughter of the founder, the principal queen of the greatest empire the world had yet seen. Her life is one of structured luxury, immense responsibility, and constant political awareness. Every interaction, every alliance within the court, every decision regarding her children carries weight. It's a life of golden cages, perhaps, but cages furnished with the finest silks, the most exquisite jewels, and the power to shape the destiny of an empire. You see her presiding over courtly functions, receiving ambassadors, perhaps from distant lands you've never even heard of, arriving with exotic gifts, managing the thousands of people who populate the royal household. Her days are filled with ceremony administration and the quiet exercise of authority. She is a bridge between the legacy of Cyrus and the reign of Darius, and the crucial link to the future through Xerxes. Her survival and prominence during these tumultuous decades under Darius speak volumes about her resilience, her intelligence, and her indispensable value to the Achaemenid dynasty. She is not just the subject of politically advantageous marriages. She is a central pillar upon which the stability and legitimacy of the empire rests. As Darius grows older, the question of succession becomes more pressing, even with Xerxes as the designated heir. The court watches, waits, and jockeys for position around Atossa and her son. She ensures his position is secure, cultivating loyalties, perhaps maneuvering discreetly against any potential rivals among Darius's other sons or powerful nobles. It's a constant game of chess played out in the opulent halls and hidden courtyards of the Persian palaces. Her life isn't just about being the queen. It's about actively safeguarding the lineage and ensuring a smooth transition of power when the time comes. She has seen firsthand what happens when succession is contested, and she is determined that her son's ascent will be unchallenged. This involves careful planning, building support networks, and exercising her considerable influence within the royal family and beyond. You see her strength, her quiet determination. She is a survivor, a strategic thinker, and a powerful figure in her own right, operating within the constraints of her time and culture. She is the queen who holds the past, present, and future of the Achaemenid dynasty in her hands, ensuring that the legacy of her father, Cyrus, lives on through her son, Xerxes. Her story is deeply intertwined with the rise and consolidation of the Persian Empire, and her most famous, perhaps most intriguing connection is yet to come. Years turn into decades under Darius the Great's reign. The empire stabilizes, stretches its mighty arms across the known world. You witness the ebb and flow of court life, the arrival of tribute caravans laden with gold and exotic goods, the endless parades and ceremonies in Susa, Babylon, and the burgeoning ceremonial capital of Persepolis. Darius is a force of nature, constantly building, organizing, expanding. You hear the rumors of campaigns, the preparations for massive expeditions, like the one that ended rather awkwardly at a place called Marathon, a minor hiccup in the grand scheme of things, but one that would echo through history. Throughout these years, Atossa remains the central figure in the royal household, the indispensable queen mother in waiting. Her influence isn't always visible in the historical records, like a king issuing a decree, but you sense it in the appointments made within the palace, in the alliances formed or dissolved, and most importantly, in the unwavering focus on her son Xerxes as the designated heir. She is the steady hand, ensuring the future is secure, navigating the complex web of family politics, keeping a watchful eye on Darius's other sons from earlier marriages who, despite being older, lack the crucial lineage link to Cyrus that her son possesses. Time, however, marches on even for the great king. Darius, after a long and impactful reign, feels the weight of years and the strain of ruling such a vast dominion. His health declines. The court holds its breath. The transition of power in any empire is a moment of immense vulnerability, a time when latent rivalries can flare up, when stability can shatter. Atossa, having lived through the violent chaos that brought Darius to power, is acutely aware of the dangers. And so, when Darius finally passes from the world of the living, it is Atossa's careful planning and her son's clear designation as heir that helps prevent a potential repeat of the succession crisis you saw earlier. Xerxes's claim is bolstered not just by Darius's choice, but by the undeniable fact that he is the grandson of Cyrus the Great through the principal queen. This legitimacy, more potent than any army, in some ways smooths his path to the throne. You witness the mourning rituals, the solemn transfer of power. Xerxes ascends as Xerxes the new great king, and Atossa, the daughter of Cyrus, the wife of Darius, now becomes the queen mother, a position of perhaps even greater prestige and potential influence. She is no longer just the powerful queen consort. She is the matriarch of the dynasty, the link to the glorious past, embodied in her father, and the guiding figure for the present and future embodied in her son. Her authority within the vast royal household is paramount. The women's quarters, a sprawling complex of courtyards, chambers and gardens filled with wives, concubines, female relatives, and hundreds, perhaps thousands of servants, is her undisputed domain. But her influence extends far beyond the domestic sphere. Kings in this era often relied heavily on trusted advisors, and while men dominated the formal governmental roles, the Queen Mother, especially one with Atossa's lineage and experience, could wield considerable informal power. Think of her as the chief advisor on family matters, perhaps the key figure in arranging strategic marriages for royal siblings or children, a trusted confidant for Xerxes on personal and potentially political issues. She has seen 2, possibly 3 reigns, navigated multiple power shifts, and understands the intricate dance of court politics better than almost anyone. Her wisdom and experience would have been invaluable to the relatively new king. Mainstream historical fact: Xerxes I succeeded his father Darius I in 486 BC. While Darius had older sons, ancient sources like Herodotus state that Atossa's influence and lineage were key factors in Xerxes being chosen as the successor. Xerxes' reign is most famously known for his massive invasion of Greece, a continuation of the conflict begun by Darius, culminating in famous battles like Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea. Life at court under Xerxes is in many ways a continuation of the grand scale established by Darius, but with Xerxes adding his own flavor. He continues the building projects at Persepolis, adding even more colossal structures, including his own palace and the famous Hall of 100 Columns. He presides over an empire at its zenith of power and wealth. And at the heart of this opulent world you find Atossa, the Queen Mother, a figure of immense respect and authority. Now it's time to introduce a crucial element of the Achaemenid court that is central to the rest of this story: the royal eunuchs. These men, castrated usually before puberty, occupied a unique and powerful position. Excluded from having their own families or dynastic ambitions in the traditional sense, they were often seen as more loyal and trustworthy than noblemen who might plot for personal gain or to establish their own lineage. Royal eunuchs served in various capacities, from administrative roles, managing vast segments of the empire's finances or logistics, to being intimately involved in the royal household. They were guardians of the harem tutors to the royal children, chamberlains, treasurers, and personal attendants to the king and the royal women, because they had unrestricted access to both the male and female quarters, a privilege no other free man enjoyed. They became indispensable intermediaries, messengers, and confidants. Imagine the complex ecosystem of the Persian court. The king is surrounded by nobles, generals, priests, scribes. The royal women are sequestered in their own extensive quarters, a world unto itself, yet deeply connected to the power structures of the court. Eunuchs were the threads weaving these worlds together. They carried messages, oversaw daily life, managed security within the women's quarters, and often became the most trusted advisors to the royal women who lived lives of luxury, but also isolation, a quirky tidbit. The power of royal eunuchs in the Achaemenid court was legendary. They weren't just servants. Some held immense wealth and influence. Historical sources mention eunuchs who commanded troops, governed provinces, or controlled access to the king himself. For a queen or queen mother, cultivating a trusted relationship with a powerful eunuch who had the king's ear or controlled the flow of information could be a vital source of power and security. Their unique status outside the traditional social and power structures of the Persian nobility allowed them to forge bonds of loyalty and dependency that were different from those with free-born officials. In this environment, it's easy to see how close relationships could form between royal women and the eunuchs who served them. These were men who spent their lives within the confines of the royal palaces, often from a young age, growing up alongside the princesses and princes. They were educated, refined, and deeply integrated into the fabric of royal life. For women of the royal family whose interactions with unrelated men were highly restricted, a eunuch could be a friend, a confidant, an ally, someone who understood their world implicitly. Atossa, as Queen Mother would have presided over a vast retinue of eunuchs, serving within her household and the women's quarters. She would have managed their appointments, relied on them for countless daily tasks, and potentially fostered relationships of trust and loyalty. Among these many eunuchs, it is not unreasonable to assume that one or more might have become particularly close to her. Consider the life of a queen mother. Despite the immense power and luxury, there would be elements of loneliness and isolation. Surrounded by dependents and those seeking favor, genuine intimacy and trust might be hard to find. A eunuch removed from the competitive male world of noble power struggles and the domestic concerns of traditional family life could potentially offer a unique form of companionship and loyalty. Historians still argue whether the relationships between royal women and eunuchs in the Achaemenid court were strictly professional, evolving into deep platonic friendships, or whether some developed into more intimate, even romantic connections, despite the obvious physical limitations implied by castration. While physical intimacy in the conventional sense might not have been possible for many eunuchs, emotional intimacy, companionship, and a unique bond formed through shared lives within the palace walls were certainly possible. The ancient sources, particularly Greek ones, which often viewed Persian customs through a lens of fascination and potential bias, sometimes hint at close relationships, but their exact nature is often left ambiguous or sensationalized. It is within this complex, opulent, and sometimes isolated world of the royal court under Xerxes with Atossa as the formidable queen mother that our story of a particular bond takes shape. Atossa, having navigated the storms of succession, established her son on the throne, and solidified her own position, now moves through life with the authority befitting her status. And somewhere in the background, perhaps initially just one of the many figures populating the royal household, is a eunuch who becomes more than just a servant or attendant. This eunuch, living a life dedicated entirely to the service of the royal family, would have been a constant presence. He would have witnessed the daily routines, the private moments, the political maneuverings from a unique vantage point. For Atossa, burdened with the weight of lineage responsibility and the subtle stresses of court life, such a person could become an indispensable source of comfort, information, and genuine connection. You can almost picture the scene, the hushed corridors of the palace, the rustle of silk robes, the intricate scent of perfumes and incense, Atossa in her chambers, perhaps receiving reports, issuing instructions, or simply seeking a moment of quiet companionship. And nearby, the trusted eunuch, always present, always discreet, his life interwoven with hers. The relationship, whatever its exact nature, would have been built on trust and shared experience within the unique bubble of the Persian court. It would have been a bond, forged in the gilded cage of royalty, a connection that existed alongside her duties as queen mother and her relationship with her powerful son. And this bond, so personal, yet lived out against the backdrop of empire, is the one that will eventually lead to the most intriguing part of Atossa's story. As Xerxes prepares for his grand, ill-fated expedition against Greece, mobilizing the vast resources of the empire, life at court is a whirlwind of activity. Yet amidst the preparations for war and the management of a sprawling empire, the private lives and relationships within the royal household continue. And Atossa, the queen mother, maintains her position, her influence, and her quiet, significant connection with the eunuch, whose presence in her life would become historically noted in a most unusual way. The stage is set for the final act of this particular historical drama, one that highlights the unexpected bonds that could form even in the most rigidly structured and politically charged environments. So as Xerxes, son of Darius and Atossa, the King of Kings prepares his immense forces for the invasion that will make his name forever etched in Western history books, even if mostly for his eventual defeat. Life continues in the opulent, sprawling palaces. Atossa, the Queen Mother, remains a central figure. She has seen dynasties rise and fall, survived purges and successions, and now stands at the pinnacle of the Achaemenid royal family's female hierarchy. Her life has been a tapestry woven with threads of power lineage and survival. Xerxes embarks on his grand campaign, leaving the heart of the empire and much of the royal court, including his formidable mother, behind. The news filters back slowly across vast distances. Reports of colossal armies, pontoons bridging the Hellespont, the initial victories in Greece, the dramatic stand at Thermopylae, the burning of Athens, and then the turn of the tide. The naval disaster at Salamis, Xerxes' return to Persia, the final defeat of his land army at Plataea, these events, earth-shattering in their implications for the future of the Mediterranean world, are experienced in Susa or Persepolis as distant tremors relayed by messengers discussed behind veiled faces in the court, and undoubtedly felt deeply by Atossa, whose son commanded the fate of the empire on distant shores. Despite the significant setback in Greece, a wound to Persian pride, and a drain on resources, though by no means crippling for the vast empire itself, Xerxes' reign continues for many more years. He focuses on building, on administering, on maintaining the vast diverse empire stretching from India to Egypt. And through these years, Atossa remains a constant. Her presence lends legitimacy and continuity to the dynasty. She is the living link to Cyrus the Great, a figure of immense respect and authority, a repository of courtly knowledge and wisdom acquired over decades. You continue to observe the rhythm of the royal court, the intricate hierarchy, the rituals of power, and you notice the enduring presence of that eunuch. The one who, through the years, has become more than just an attendant. He is a shadow companion, a trusted ear, a silent presence, whose life has become intimately intertwined with the Queen Mother's. Perhaps he manages her vast personal wealth, oversees her estates, or simply provides the quiet companionship that high status often denies. Their bond, whatever its precise nature, deepened over time. Living within the gilded cage of royalty, sharing the unique stresses and isolations of that world, a relationship built on mutual reliance and understanding could easily flourish. He is not a competitor for power, not a potential usurper, not constrained by the social expectations placed upon free-born men. He is dedicated to her service, his entire existence shaped by his role within her household. For a woman like Atossa, who had to be constantly vigilant in the treacherous world of court politics, the loyalty of such a figure would have been invaluable. Mainstream historical fact after his failed invasion of Greece. Xerxes, I ruled for over a decade before being assassinated in 465 BC. While sources differ on the exact circumstances, it's generally accepted he was killed in a palace intrigue, highlighting the ever-present dangers even for a king of kings. Atossa is believed to have died sometime during Xerxes' reign, or shortly after, though the precise year is unknown. Her influence during his rule, particularly in the early years, is noted by ancient historians. Years pass. The weight of time which spares no one eventually settles upon Atossa. Having lived a life of extraordinary privilege and power, navigating the turbulent currents of the Achaemenid court for potentially 70 years or more, her journey draws towards its close. You sense the slowing down, the quiet preparation for the inevitable. The bustling palace seems to hold its breath around her, the central pillar of its maternal lineage fading. And then she is gone. Atossa, daughter of Cyrus, wife of Darius, mother of Xerxes, the queen mother, passes away. The court goes into official mourning. Rituals are performed, lamentations echo through the palace halls. Preparations are made for her burial, a ceremony befitting her immense status. She is to be laid to rest in the royal necropolis, likely near Persepolis, or Nakshe Rustam, in a magnificent tomb carved into the rock face, joining the ranks of the great kings and queens who came before her. But as the arrangements are being finalized, a remarkable detail emerges. Atossa, before her death, made a final unusual request, a request concerning the eunuch who had served her so faithfully, so closely, for so many years. Her dying wish was that he should not merely continue serving her son, or retire, or disappear into the anonymity of the palace staff. Her request, a testament to the depth, and perhaps the unique nature of their bond, was that this eunuch should be buried with her. This was not a common practice. While servants might sometimes be interred near their masters in earlier periods, or different cultures, burying a high-ranking royal, a queen mother, with a servant, even a high-status eunuch, was highly unusual within the formal structured world of the Achaemenid royal necropolis. Royal tombs were for royalty. To command that her eunuch be killed and interred alongside her was a profound statement, one that elevated his status in death, far beyond what tradition dictated, placing him, metaphorically at least, within the sacred space reserved for the royal lineage. A quirky tidbit. While not a regular practice for servants in Achaemenid Persia, the act of burying individuals with their rulers was seen in earlier Mesopotamian civilizations like the royal tombs of Ur, though on a vastly different scale, and other cultures. For the Achaemenids, known for their relatively less brutal practices towards court personnel compared to some earlier empires, Atossa's request stands out. It suggests either a deep personal connection, a unique religious belief about companionship in the afterlife, or possibly a way to ensure the eunuch's absolute loyalty and secrecy even beyond the grave, although the companionship angle feels more fitting for our story. And so her wish was carried out. The trusted eunuch, the silent companion of the Queen Mother for so many years, was put to death, his life ending concurrent with hers. He was prepared for burial and laid to rest within Atossa's tomb. His final resting place, by her command, was not among the common graves or a separate area for court officials, but alongside the daughter of Cyrus the Great herself. Historians still argue whether the account of Atossa's burial with her eunuch, primarily reported by the Greek physician and historian Ctesias, who served at the Persian court decades later, is entirely accurate. Ctesias is known for sometimes sensationalizing or fabricating details about the Persian court, which he based on what he heard while there. However, the specificity of this detail, the fact that it concerns a royal woman rather than a king, and its unusual nature, lend it a degree of plausibility. If true, it speaks volumes about the complex, sometimes hidden relationships that existed within the royal palace, and the lengths to which a powerful figure like Atossa might go to honor a unique bond, even in death. Regardless of the absolute historical certainty of every detail, the story captures something essential about the human element within the grand sweep of history. Here is Atossa, a woman defined by her lineage and her role in the birth and continuation of an empire, making a deeply personal decision that defied convention. Her life spent navigating political currents, securing her son's succession, and presiding over a world of immense luxury and strict protocol, ends with a request that highlights a relationship built not on blood or power dynamics, but on something else entirely. Trust companionship, a shared existence lived out away from the eyes of the wider world. You have followed her journey from the shadows of her father's court, through the upheaval that brought Darius to power, her rise to queen, the birth and ascent of her son Xerxes, her decades as queen mother, and finally, her death, and this singular act. You have seen the world of the Achaemenid Persians through the lens of one of its most powerful, yet perhaps most private women. You have experienced the opulence, the danger, the rituals, and the human connections that existed within that ancient empire. And now the journey through Atossa's life, and through the intriguing historical footnote of the queen who took her eunuch lover, or perhaps simply her most trusted companion, to the grave, comes to its end. The echoes of the Persian court begin to fade. The rustle of silk robes softens, the scents of incense dissipate. The vastness of history, once so immediate, recedes back into the quiet depths of the past. Your time witnessing this particular corner of the ancient world